Upon my return to Earth, I did not succumb to fear as I faced the solitary eternal night of the dark side of the moon. However, I was obviously aware of the vast and intimidating unknown that surrounded me. Michael Collins, the third astronaut of the Apollo 11 mission, was the first person to see the far side of the moon. Various rumors continue to circulate about what Collins actually saw during his solitary flight around Earth's satellite. Collins himself made some extraordinary statements about his discoveries that, according to many, leave room for speculation. What did Collins truly experience during his flight, and how did the astronaut cope with this solitary experience? Let's shed light on this aspect and reveal all the facts to you. The Apollo 11 mission marked an unforgettable moment in human history. When the Saturn V rocket launched on July 16, 1969, it was not only a technical masterpiece traveling into space but also a symbol of human courage and exploration. Millions of people worldwide applauded in front of their television screens when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, preceding his colleague Buzz Aldrin, and declared, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." That day opened a new chapter in space travel. The mission's success was also the result of intense competition between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Both superpowers wanted to demonstrate their technological and scientific superiority and conquer space. The success of the American moon landing was not only a technological triumph but also an important geopolitical statement that gave the United States renewed confidence. The fact that the Russians had put the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, left a painful wound in the nation's pride. When the Americans were the first to set foot on the moon, this disgrace was forgotten. Armstrong and Aldrin stayed on the moon for a few hours, collecting a total of 21.5 kilograms of moon rock and dust, revolutionizing our understanding of the moon and leaving behind some devotional items, such as a plaque commemorating the deceased astronauts of the Apollo 1 mission, a plaque marking the visit of the first men on the moon, and, of course, the American flag. At the time, the news not only focused on impressions of the moon but also on the view of Earth from space or the moon. Our world became a beautiful blue dot floating in a dark space with all the heroic deeds, familiar stones, and excitement that surrounded Armstrong and Aldrin. One aspect of the moon landing has somehow always been forgotten. This was true already in the 1960s and has not changed to this day. This circumstance concerns a man still known today as the "forgotten astronaut" by a few space enthusiasts, Michael Collins. Michael Collins had no less important a task during the mission. His job was to control the command module that all three astronauts used to fly to the moon. During the moonwalk, the expert pilot continued to guide the spacecraft in lunar orbit and waited for the return of his two colleagues. Collins had to ensure that the Columbia module remained in a stable orbit and was ready to retrieve the lunar module upon its return from the lunar surface. During his orbits around the moon, Collins crossed the dark side of the moon, where he was cut off from all communication with Earth for about 48 minutes per orbit. Collins was the loneliest person in the universe, farther from Earth than any other human and completely alone. He later described these moments as mostly peaceful and quiet, not lonely or isolating. One of the most critical maneuvers Collins had to perform was the rendezvous and docking with the lunar landing module after Armstrong and Aldrin had completed their historic moon landing. An error in this case would have had catastrophic consequences and could have stranded Armstrong and Aldrin on the moon, but Collins executed the maneuver with precision and skill. Although Collins never received the attention his colleagues did, he was proud of his role and understood the importance of his task for the mission's success. The press, however, stylized Collins as the overlooked hero in the history of spaceflight. The astronauts of the Apollo 11 mission, thanks to the moon landing, became real heroes, but almost no one knows who Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were in real life. Neil Armstrong grew up in a small town in Ohio and was fascinated by the sky from a young age. At the age of 16, he already had his pilot's license. Armstrong could fly before he could drive a car, and this passion naturally led him to the Navy. After serving as a Navy pilot in the Korean War, he became a test pilot, flying some of the fastest and most dangerous planes in the world. After the war, he quickly entered NASA's space programs and, thanks to his calm and composed demeanor, was the ideal candidate to command the lunar flight. Compared to Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin was a more energetic and charismatic man. Born in New Jersey to a military family, Aldrin seemed destined for the sky. He was not only a brilliant engineer but also a skilled fighter pilot. During the moon landing, his task was to safely guide the Eagle landing module onto the lunar soil. Michael Collins was born in Italy when his father was a military attaché in the Italian capital. After a childhood spent in Europe, Collins attended the United States Military Academy at West Point. The third man of Apollo 11 first became a test pilot. Together these three men formed a perfect team, not only for their professional excellence but also for their unique life stories and personalities. After the moon landing, however, it is said that the three drifted apart again. Aldrin and Armstrong still often appeared together on television, while Collins became a kind of ghost of the moon landing. Only recently has interest in the man who was the first to see the far side of the moon started to grow again, and for a good reason. What did Michael Collins really see? The part of the moon that never faces Earth has always captured people's imagination. When Michael Collins orbited the moon alone, he was the first person ever to see this side of the moon. Nowadays, wild rumors about spaceships and relics of an extraterrestrial civilization circulate around the far side of the moon. During his orbits around the moon, Collins passed twice over the dark side for about 48 minutes. In his memoir, Collins described the landscape as rugged and cratered, emanating a strange but beautiful silence. "I am alone now, truly alone, and absolutely isolated from any known life. If a count were to be made, the score would be 3 billion plus 2 on the other side of the moon, and 1 plus God knows what on this side." Michael Collins. UFO enthusiasts and researchers want to find hidden clues in confusing passages of Collins' book about what he really saw. Several images that have circulated on the web for decades show formations on the far side of the moon that resemble giant spaceships or rocks that look like building remains. It is a fact that today we have many images of the far side of the moon thanks to satellite images. Even ordinary internet users can zoom in on released data at any time and explore the far side of the moon. Official images show little to no evidence of alien theories, but NASA insiders always claim it is a big deception. The satellite images are said to have been censored and even edited by hundreds of technicians and image editors. There is no hint of alien power or relics of spaceships or buildings visible. All the astronauts who have been on the moon or orbited it, like Collins, are supposed to have received a gag order from NASA's powerful figures after their flights. It is presumed that censored radio recordings prove Armstrong and Aldrin also saw spaceships on the moon. NASA vehemently denies such claims, so the mystery of what really happens on the far side of the moon remains. After their return to Earth, the astronauts were interrogated by journalists for almost their entire lives, even about extraterrestrials. Officially, they saw nothing, but even in this case, there are dozens of testimonies that paint a different picture. Buzz Aldrin's sister is said to have once admitted to a journalist that her brother had been gagged and that he suffered greatly because of it. Famous quotes from Armstrong indicate that he privately hinted that he and his family were in danger when he talked about some events of the moon landing. Armstrong tried to escape the hype surrounding him just 2 years after the moon landing, becoming a professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Cincinnati. He later promoted various space and educational initiatives and served on the boards of several companies. Armstrong died in August 2012 at the age of 82 following complications from heart surgery. Aldrin also left NASA in 1971 and struggled less successfully as commander of a test pilot school for the United States Air Force. The fact that the former hero struggled with alcoholism and depression further fueled speculation about possible pressure and strange experiences during the moon flight. In his numerous books and memoirs, there are supposed to be various allusions to problems with NASA and the pressures Aldrin experienced during his experiences. However, we can only continue to speculate. Aldrin is the only living Apollo 11 astronaut. In 2023, he celebrated his 93rd birthday and also married his longtime partner. Michael Collins also retired from NASA shortly after Apollo 11 and practically disappeared from the scene. Initially, he took an obscure job in public affairs at the United States Department of State. He later became director of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. His autobiography, Carrying the Fire, is considered one of the best astronaut memoirs for its sensitive and insightful descriptions. Collins died in April 2021 at the age of 90. 3 men, 3 destinies, and one thing in common. Although Collins seemed to have drawn the short straw of the mission, he was the first and one of the few to see the mystery of the far side of the moon. What do you think? Did Michael Collins really see things he was not allowed to talk about for his entire life? Or do you think all the hype about aliens on the moon is completely exaggerated? Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to not miss any other videos.